15 years of marriage, church on Sundays, barbecues on Maple Street. To everyone in Clearwater, Florida, Emily and Marcus Patterson were the perfect couple. But when Emily followed her husband one night, she discovered a shocking secret. By the next morning, Marcus was dead, Emily was in handcuffs, and their neighbors were left asking, how could the perfect marriage end in murder? What really drove Emily to pull that trigger? And what secrets was Marcus hiding behind 15 years of Sunday church services and neighborhood barbecues? Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Was Emily Patterson a betrayed wife who snapped under pressure, or a cold-blooded killer who planned her revenge? Why was Marcus living two completely different lives, and how did he manage to hide his true identity for over a decade? When Emily discovered Marcus wasn't the man she married, did she have any choice but to confront him? And when that confrontation turned deadly, was it really a crime of passion, or something much more calculated? To understand what happened in that bedroom on March 15th, we need to go back to the beginning, to when Emily and Marcus Patterson looked like the perfect American couple living their perfect American dream. Emily Margaret Thompson met Marcus James Patterson in 1998 at a church youth gathering in Tampa. She was 23, a kindergarten teacher with blonde hair always pulled back in a neat ponytail, the kind of woman who baked cookies for school fundraisers and never missed Sunday service. Marcus was 25, 6 feet tall with an easy smile and steady job at the local bank. He wore pressed shirts, drove a reliable Honda, and had the kind of manners that made Emily's parents approve immediately. Within 2 years, they were married in the same church where they'd met, with Emily in her grandmother's pearl necklace and Marcus in a rented tuxedo that made him look like a movie star. For 15 years, they built what everyone in Clearwater considered the ideal marriage. They bought a 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street with a white picket fence that Marcus painted every spring. Emily continued teaching, while Marcus worked his way up to branch manager at First National Bank. They hosted 4th of July barbecues, where neighbors brought potato salad and kids ran through sprinkler water, while adults sipped sweet tea on the back porch. Every Sunday you could find them in the third pew at St. Matthew's Baptist Church, Emily's hand resting on Marcus's knee during Pastor Williams's sermons about love, commitment, and faith. Their neighbors still talk about how Marcus would surprise Emily with flowers on random Tuesdays, how Emily would pack Marcus elaborate lunches with little notes tucked between the sandwiches. They tried for children but couldn't conceive, so they poured their parental energy into church youth group activities and foster care volunteering. To everyone watching, they were proof that true love and commitment could create a lasting partnership. But as we now know, appearances can be devastatingly deceptive. The first cracks appeared in late 2012, though Emily didn't recognize them as warning signs at the time. Marcus started working later at the bank, claiming new regional responsibilities required evening meetings. He'd come home after 9 o'clock, exhausted and distant, pecking Emily's cheek before heading straight to shower. When she asked about his day, his answers became shorter, less detailed. The man who used to share every funny customer interaction and workplace drama suddenly had nothing to say. Emily found receipts in Marcus's pants pockets while doing laundry, gas station purchases from parts of town he had no business visiting, restaurant bills for 2 people when he claimed to be working through lunch alone. There were new expenses on their joint credit card that didn't make sense. Cover charges at establishments she'd never heard of, late-night Uber rides to addresses she couldn't place. When she asked Marcus about these charges, he explained them away with stories about client meetings and business dinners that sounded reasonable enough, but left Emily with a nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up. Marcus's phone became another source of tension. The man who used to leave his cell phone on the kitchen counter while he showered now carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. He started receiving text messages at odd hours that made him smile in ways Emily hadn't seen in months. But when she asked who was texting, he'd say it was just work colleagues or old friends. He set new privacy locks on his phone and laptop, claiming the bank required stronger security measures for all employees. These changes happened gradually, so Emily convinced herself she was being paranoid, that marriage naturally evolved and people were entitled to privacy. But Emily Patterson wasn't stupid. She'd been teaching elementary school for over a decade, and she knew when someone wasn't telling the truth. Children might be obvious liars, but adults were just more sophisticated about it. She started paying attention to details Marcus thought she wouldn't notice, the way he avoided eye contact when explaining his whereabouts, how he'd changed his cologne to something spicier and more expensive, the fact that he'd started working out and buying clothes that made him look younger. Emily began to suspect her husband was having an affair, and that suspicion ate at her daily, making her analyze every conversation and question every explanation Marcus offered. If you're still watching, drop a comment with Florida so we know who's writing this case out with us. On March 14, 2013, Emily made a decision that would change everything. Marcus had left for another evening client meeting, and instead of staying home grading spelling tests like she usually did, Emily got in her car and followed him. She'd never been the suspicious wife type, but months of unexplained absences and strange behavior had pushed her past her comfort zone. She needed to know what Marcus was really doing during those late nights, even if discovering the truth meant confronting her worst fears about their marriage. Emily followed Marcus's Honda through downtown Clearwater, keeping several cars between them so he wouldn't spot her silver Camry in his rearview mirror. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, and her heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the radio. Part of her hoped Marcus really was going to a business meeting, that she'd watch him enter some office building and feel foolish for doubting him. But when Marcus parked in front of a building with a rainbow neon sign reading "The Sanctuary," Emily knew her marriage was about to end. The Sanctuary wasn't just any nightclub, it was Clearwater's most popular gay bar, a place Emily had driven past countless times without ever thinking about who went there or why. Now, watching her husband of 15 years walk confidently through those doors like he belonged there, Emily felt her entire world collapse in real time. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, trying to process what she'd witnessed, before gathering the courage to follow him inside. The club was darker and louder than Emily expected, filled with music she didn't recognize and people living lives she'd never imagined. She spotted Marcus almost immediately, not because she was looking for him, but because he was laughing louder than she'd heard in years, his arm around a younger man with dark hair and designer jeans. They looked comfortable together, intimate in a way that made Emily's stomach turn. This wasn't Marcus experimenting or making a mistake. This was Marcus being himself in a way he'd never been at home. Emily watched her husband dance with this stranger, watched him whisper in the man's ear and receive whispered responses that made him smile. She watched Marcus drink cocktails she'd never seen him order, watched him move his body in ways she'd never experienced during their own intimate moments. For Emily, this wasn't just infidelity. It was the discovery that everything she'd believed about her husband, their marriage, and their future together had been an elaborate lie. She left the club without confronting Marcus, drove home, and waited. When Marcus returned at 11:30 p.m. with his usual story about a difficult client meeting, Emily said nothing. She lay awake next to him all night, listening to him breathe and wondering how many other nights he'd come home from the sanctuary to their marriage bed. By morning, 15 years of love had transformed into something much more dangerous. The confrontation happened the following evening when Marcus returned from work. Emily had spent the day in a haze of anger and betrayal, calling in sick to school for the first time in 3 years because she couldn't trust herself to be around children while processing what she'd discovered. She'd rehearsed what she wanted to say, planned to have a calm conversation about honesty and their future together, but when Marcus walked through their front door with that same innocent smile he'd worn for 15 years, Emily's carefully planned discussion exploded into accusations and screaming. "I saw you," Emily said before Marcus could even set down his briefcase. "I saw you at that club with him." Marcus's face went white, then red. Then he tried to deny everything until Emily described exactly what she'd witnessed. The conversation escalated quickly, with Marcus alternating between apologizing and blaming Emily for spying on him. He said he'd been struggling with his sexuality for years, but hadn't known how to tell her, that he'd married her hoping his feelings would change, that he'd never meant to hurt her, but couldn't keep living a lie. Emily later told police that Marcus said he wanted a divorce, that he was tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't, that he'd already been talking to a lawyer about how to separate their assets and lives. For Emily, this wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the revelation that her entire adult life had been built on deception. Every anniversary dinner, every Valentine's gift, every intimate moment they'd shared had been Marcus performing a role rather than expressing genuine love. The shooting happened around 9:15 p.m. Neighbors reported hearing two adults shouting, then a woman screaming, then two gunshots. When police arrived, they found Marcus Patterson dead in the couple's bedroom, shot twice in the chest with Emily's registered .38 revolver. Emily was sitting on their bed holding the gun, covered in her husband's blood and seemingly in shock. She told responding officers, "He lied to me about everything. Everything was fake." During questioning, Emily admitted she'd shot Marcus, but claimed she'd acted in self-defense, saying he'd grabbed her arm and threatened to take everything in the divorce. She said she'd gotten the gun from their bedroom drawer because she was afraid of how angry Marcus had become when she confronted him about his secret life. However, the physical evidence didn't support Emily's self-defense claim. Marcus had no defensive wounds, and the angle of the gunshots suggested he'd been standing several feet away from Emily when she fired. Detectives discovered Emily had purchased the ammunition found in the gun just 2 days before the shooting, the day after she'd followed Marcus to the sanctuary. They also found internet searches on Emily's laptop for Florida divorce laws, life insurance policies, and articles about wives who'd killed their husbands and claimed self-defense. Perhaps most damaging was a journal entry Emily had written the morning after discovering Marcus at the club. 15 years of my life wasted on a lie. How do I make him pay for stealing my entire future? Emily Patterson's murder trial began 8 months later and immediately became the most sensational case in Clearwater's recent history. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Chen, argued that Emily had planned Marcus's murder from the moment she discovered his sexuality, that she'd purchased ammunition and researched legal defenses before confronting her husband. Chen portrayed Emily as a woman so consumed by rage and humiliation that she'd chosen murder over divorce, telling the jury that Emily couldn't accept that her perfect marriage had been an illusion. The defense, headed by veteran attorney Robert Martinez, painted Emily as a victim of psychological abuse who'd been driven to temporary insanity by years of deception. Martinez argued that Emily had suffered what psychologists call betrayal trauma, a condition where discovering a partner's hidden life creates symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. He brought in expert witnesses to explain how Emily's entire sense of reality had been shattered in a single night, making her temporarily incapable of rational decision-making. The trial's most emotional moment came when Alexander "Alex" Rivera, the man Emily had seen with Marcus at the sanctuary, testified for the prosecution. Alex, 28 years old and openly gay since high school, described a 3-month relationship with Marcus that had been intense and secretive. According to Alex, Marcus had talked about leaving his wife, but was terrified of how their conservative community would react to his coming out. Marcus had told Alex that Emily was suspicious, but that he wasn't ready to end his marriage until he could figure out how to rebuild his entire life as an openly gay man. Alex's testimony revealed that Marcus hadn't been casually experimenting with his sexuality. He'd been living a carefully compartmentalized double life, maintaining his straight persona at home and work while exploring his true identity in safe spaces like the sanctuary. Alex described Marcus as kind, funny, and desperate to find authenticity, nothing like the manipulative liar the prosecution had portrayed. For the first time during the trial, jurors saw Marcus as a victim too, a man struggling with internalized shame in a community where being gay wasn't widely accepted. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Emily Patterson guilty of voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. They'd rejected the prosecution's premeditation argument, but couldn't accept the defense's temporary insanity claim. The judge sentenced Emily to 18 years in prison, acknowledging that while Marcus's deception didn't justify murder, Emily's actions had been driven by genuine emotional trauma rather than cold calculation. Today, Emily Patterson is serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution, where she's become an advocate for LGBTQ+ awareness programs. In interviews, she's expressed deep remorse for taking Marcus's life and acknowledgement that her husband was struggling with issues beyond her understanding. She said that if she could go back to that March evening, she would have chosen divorce over violence, that no amount of betrayal justifies ending someone's life. The Patterson case forced Clearwater's religious community to examine their attitudes toward sexuality and marriage. Pastor Williams, who'd officiated Marcus and Emily's wedding, now speaks about the dangers of forcing people to hide their authentic selves and the importance of creating safe spaces for honest conversations about identity. The Sanctuary Club, where this tragedy began, has become a community center, offering counseling services and support groups for people struggling with sexuality and faith conflicts. But questions remain that keep this case complicated and controversial. Was Emily Patterson a cold-blooded killer who planned her revenge, or was she a traumatized woman who made a terrible decision in a moment of psychological crisis? Should Marcus bear some responsibility for building his marriage on deception, or was he simply a victim of societal pressure to conform to heterosexual expectations? How do we balance sympathy for Emily's betrayal trauma with accountability for her violent response? Think about your own relationships and the secrets people might be keeping from those they love. How would you react if you discovered that someone you'd trusted completely had been living an entirely different life? Would you be able to process that betrayal without letting anger overwhelm your judgment? Emily Patterson thought she knew the man she'd been married to for 15 years, but she'd been sharing her life with someone who was essentially a stranger. That realization destroyed her sense of reality so completely that she chose murder over accepting the truth. What do you think? Was justice served in Emily Patterson's case, or should her sentence have been different? Was Marcus Patterson a victim of his wife's violence, or was he partially responsible for creating the circumstances that led to his death? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how you think situations like this should be handled when they arise in real families and real communities. And if this case made you think about the secrets people keep in relationships, wait until you hear about the Florida pastor's wife who discovered her husband's gambling addiction had cost them their house, their savings, and their children's college funds, and what she did when she realized the church donations had been funding his habit for over a decade.